We got so much to talk about, and let's hear some questions, comments, whatever. Yes, I'm here.
What does the Globe do now? How do you follow up? You can take it away.
Let the editor make that.
Well, we are continuing to cover the story. Maria and Steve and Bill have been down several times since. Maria just wrote a story, it was in the paper this past weekend, quite an amazing story about a little girl whose parents are here in Boston, and because of immigration, some paperwork issues, the parents came to Boston ahead of the child, thinking that they would get her here in a few weeks, but of course then the earthquake happened and now the child is stuck in Haiti with relatives and they're having a really difficult time getting her out. We're working on some additional other stories. Steve is actually going back with Dina on Friday to Haiti, and so there'll be, we're planning to stick with this story for quite some time, and you just, keep buying the paper and looking at the website. You'll see some more coverage very soon. So we do not intend to drop the story, and we're very much aware that it's a continuing, ongoing tragedy, and there are many other stories to tell.
The second question was right here.
So we're 4.5, 5 months out, and you've been back. What did you notice?
Well, Steve, you should say too. For me, I think Bill and I were talking about this. At first when we were first there, it was just a rush to report. It was a state of panic and lack of help. And there's help, but it just it seems it's the tedium and the lack of shelter. Like the slowness of the response really struck me. How much more there is, and how quickly. I used to live in Latin America, and you used to live in Miami, so you know how powerful hurricanes can be, and that's coming right up. And see these almost mini villages of tents, and people were still living under tarps, and mosquitoes were biting. And Mass General told me I had to get a polio booster because they've had cases of polio there, and so. I think it's really a very dire situation. So when Dina was talking about being afraid that people would forget, I think that's a real fear. And I think that the danger, a lot of people say the danger is getting worse, and you can see how that's possible. The decomposing bodies, the lack of a sewage system. When we went down to write about a little girl who had been left behind, as Gideon mentioned, and a few days, it seemed, in some days it seemed normal. They could get their cell phone service, they had a generator that was running. And then they lost contact again because they ran out of fuel, and there were no cars in the street all of a sudden. So I think it's a very unpredictable and dangerous situation still. Steve, I wonder what you would.
I think almost all that needs to be said was an experience Maria had with her, the remarkable story that appeared Sunday that I have repeated that has stuck with me. That she was writing about a family living in the backyard of its sundered house, and it was the 3-year-old's birthday, and they were able to go to a bakery and get this just remarkable cake, just like you would buy down the street anywhere here. But what made it paradoxical is they were having the party under a tent in the backyard. And so what I saw in my trips there was a return of a level of commerce, but in my mind what trumps everything is you have 1.3 million people still subsisting under tents. And so that to me says that fundamentally for those people very little has changed since January 12th. And it's a concept that's sitting here. I think that unless you witness it and feel the power of it, the notion, sleeping under a tent, how bad can it be? It's pretty bad. I mean, it's it's really horrendous, and something that Maria hit upon, that in a sense maybe it's a banal reaction, but it's the one that I had over and over again, was just the sheer tedium, particularly for those who are amputees, who have any sort of injury, as day melts into night and night melts into day, and just to be sequestered there hour upon hour, it just, it's a testament to humans' ability to survive, that people aren't just going bad.
So you had a question here?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, as journalist and an editor at the Globe, what, in your opinion, the relationship in the kind of collective American psyche is of our foreign wars, Hurricane Katrina and Haiti, and kind of the response and the media coverage and how those things are related in your minds?
Did everybody hear that back? The question has to do with the relationship between these various terrible conflicts around the world. Is that the question?
Yeah. The question is, in the collective American psyche, what's the relationship between our, vast resources being spent on foreign wars, the response to Hurricane Katrina, and the response to Haiti, and how those events are related in the American psyche and in our response to them?
I'd just like to address a part of that question and then let you guys tackle the rest. In terms of popular opinion, I can't speak for, I'm not Stephen Colbert, so I can't speak for a nation. In my slice of experience, I think there's an incredible chasm between people's understanding, largely, of how incredibly huge this disaster was compared with Katrina. Katrina happened in our backyard. I mean, it happened in Louisiana, it happened domestically, and 8,000 people died and wiped out the city, and how many?
About 1,500.
Oh, that's it, 1,500 people died. And so I've had people, I think there's, when I try to explain that over 200,000 people died in this earthquake, and just how it's not just, one city block or 5 city blocks, it's like everything. That, I think, is one big comprehension gap in terms of just magnitude. In terms of the rest of your question, I'm going to toss that over.
I guess the only thing I would add is that the sad truth is Americans live in a totally different reality. One thing that really is amazing, what's amazing to me about Haitians is how tough they've had it forever. So when something like this happens, it's like just another obstacle to go around or to go above. I mean, we run into families that for generations, one of the family members' entire day was spent going to gather water. One of the kids would go down and sell some rice. I mean, the average Haitian makes $2.35 a day. It's a whole nother reality. And you can almost feel it as a journalist on one of these big stories. There's this, it hits, and there's this tremendous interest, and it rises and rises. And then with the blanket coverage of worldwide media now, around the clock, there's always this, like the Haiti fatigue or whatever settles in. It might be 4 days, 3 days, 4 days. Unless it's an ongoing conflict, when it's a natural disaster, I think at some point, and I'm not saying this I think is a good thing, but this is the reality. After about 4, 5, 6 days, people back home will say, yeah, enough already, we get it. Haiti is, got the crap kicked out of it, and it's horrible, and, the amazing thing was that I think that at the end of the day, 50% of all Americans they found had donated money to Haiti. So I think it raised more funds and got more worldwide attention than any other natural disaster in the history of man. But at some point, the Red Sox opening day is coming, and people just sort of, they don't lose interest, but it sort of starts to fade. Unfortunately, what Dina said in her video, that's just the reality of it. At some point, people want to move on, and they never forget it, and I think this story's got legs, unlike a lot of recent disasters. think like Katrina, although Katrina has the local angle being in the United States. But that's just the reality of it. As a newspaper, I think you have to gauge, obviously, the importance of the story, and I think most newspapers will report beyond what people, the average person really wants to hear. And I'm saying here for that, because it's an important story. But, you know, and I think the approach the Globe is going to take in the future is we're going to strategically strike important stories down there that will resonate with our readers. You know, just to go down and do another story of what's going on in Haiti, unless it has a strong local angle or some kind of impact to our readers, it's going to be a harder sell. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, up here in the you, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Okay, first I want to thank you both for telling me what happened to Popeye. My question here is, were many of the temporary orphans reunited with their family? And my second question is, we were reading in the newspaper about child smuggling. Was much of that really going on?
I don't know about the temporary orphans, the status with that. In terms of the smuggling, it was not my perception when I was there that there was much of that going on. I don't know what you witnessed while you were there.
I mean, do you mean the orphans that were just generally in the news? I mean, I know that 1,300 people got what the U.S. government calls humanitarian parole, which is permission to get out of the country, you know, used very sparingly. And 80% of them, those folks were orphans. So a lot of, you know, hundreds of orphans were brought to the United States. They had been in the pipeline and kind of gotten their final approvals done here and, you know, at the last minute. And as for child smuggling, you know, we didn't see that, but we saw plenty of situations like children alone on the street, children restavek, which were kind of like what people call child slaves, or, you know, people working in houses and, or, you know, and I think honestly, given the lack of a government and lack of infrastructure, I think I honestly don't know. You know, I think it would be very, very hard to know what's going on. I hope people keep paying attention.
I just wanted to point out, that's Popeye. There are 6 children found in a field, correct? There are just 6 kids found in a field, varying degrees of injury, and no parents around. And this was one of them. We named him, I don't know, the medical team named him Popeye. And this kid, I don't know if it was trauma or he had some sort of a underlying disability, but he couldn't be left alone. He wouldn't stand up, and you had to always hold him unless he was asleep. And if you didn't, he would just start wailing. So he just got passed around from doctor to doctor to nurse, and people just held him for days, like a long time. And when we left, we weren't sure what was going on with him, but it turned out that he got reunited with his parents.
Yes, sir.
I'm struck a little bit by the huge amount of financial resources that have been devoted to this, and on the one hand, and the relatively little impact it seems to have had on the other hand. Have you tried to follow the money?
The question has to do with how the money is being spent and whether it's effective.
It sounds like, no, it's not effective.
I'm sorry, do you mean the aid money that's
Just, Bill mentioned that this has resulted in more funds being devoted to it than any other national disaster. So funds from any source, what's happening with it?
I'd just like to speak briefly. I think Steve would probably be a great person to answer this question, but it's like money's flowing, but to what? And I don't think it's like nobody's fault, but the problem is so big. There's so many problems, and there's so few. I mean, at first it was just you couldn't even communicate. You can't go anywhere. You can't get anything. So it's not just like a part of the city. I mean, it's everything. There's no government, and I think things have changed obviously in the past 4 months. But I think just a true appreciation of just how enormous the problem is, I think is the first part of any answer to that question.
Even before the earthquake, there was a web of non-governmental organizations working in Haiti. By some counts, 200, maybe more than that. And so the very wise question you posed could have been asked even prior to the earthquake. And one of the issues, according to those who have studied this, is that you oftentimes have NGOs with overlapping missions. You have people coming in to do the same task and really no coordination. And I was really struck when Dina and I went to do a story in collaboration with our colleague Jim Smith, who was here in Boston, that at Partners in Health, that what happens repeatedly there is that people show up and say, tell us what you do because we'd like to come here and do the same thing. And they try to say to people, well, it's not that we're being territorial, but we're doing it already and there's so much other work to be done. Why don't you go, for instance, a subject that I've been looking into regarding amputees. Before the earthquake, there was only one organization helping amputees. And in fact, Partners in Health repeatedly said to people coming in country, why don't you work on the subject of amputees? And so this has been a long-running problem in Haiti. And as much of an optimist as I often am, I despair for moving forward whether the resources will be used in a way that's really organized and constructive.
I mean, just to give, I actually think it's a great story, and it's something that Bill talked about very early on. And the question is, how do you trace it? You know, how do you get the documents? How do you kind of prove that, you know, what's going on? But this came up. I mean, they actually had the international community, you know, NGOs and other folks had this come up at a conference about Honduras. Remember Hurricane Mitch and all the money and, you know, stuff that flowed out in Honduras? Well, Honduras is still in very serious problem, you know, having very serious problems. So what happened to the money that went there? And I think you have to ask that question about Haiti, and there has to be a way that journalistically we can try to wrap our heads around it. I hope.
John?
Thank you as well. And in the face of such overwhelming devastation, it's many of us long for solutions and stories of hope and stories of effectiveness, right? And I think a lot of us are inspired by the work of Partners in Health. I'm wondering, are there similar, is there a version of Partners in Health doing as effective work on housing or economic development? And then related to that, is President Bill Clinton making any bit of difference in his role with respect to this?
I just want to relate a little anecdote. On one of the trips on the way out, I was waiting at the gate in American Airlines in Port-au-Prince once the flights had resumed. And I ran into this wonderful guy from North Carolina. He had a plan, he had blueprints, and he had gone down there to scout some land where he thought he was just this can-do kind of guy. I can help, I can solve this problem. We saw a lot of these people very early on. And he had found this area, I think it was like 500 or 1,000 acres, and he had modular housing. He knew he could come down and design and put in a septic system and wells. And he's like, I can make this problem go away. He said, the thing that's so hard to understand is that interface between governments and that territorialism. You know, in effect, the whole government was gone. I mean, we went down on the first trip. It was like going down to Washington. You know, the White House was flattened, the Capitol was flattened, the Supreme Court was flattened, the Russell Office building. It was all gone. The president was living homeless in the airport. One of the stories we never got a chance to do. But so I think that there's this incredible dynamic, and I'm not schooled on the whole subject, but I think you have this Americans wanting to come to health, and I'm sure at some point there's a pushback of like, wait a minute, give us the money. We know how to take care of our country. And I think that's very frustrating, and at some point I think some people will fall along the wayside and just give up. They'll send money. How much of it will actually, you know, get done to fundamentally change the issue? How do you decide? People say, well, let's just level Port-au-Prince, we'll bulldoze it, we'll go out we'll go on the other side of the port, we'll build a new city. Well, think if some people came into Boston and said, you know what, we're gonna move you guys up to Revere. We saw like literally 5-10 days after the earthquake, people were taking, mud, and with little cinder blocks they found in the neighborhood were starting to build their house, because that's their home. So I think it's easy to say that, to come up with these grand solutions, being at an arm's length, but it's hard to, I think, implement.
Anyone on Clinton?
I'd like to ask one question from a kind of journalism and students point of view, because we talk a lot in journalism ethics about you, the human being, and the person, and then you, the reporter. And I can't imagine a more dramatic example of you being on covering a story and also feeling this pulse that comes through those photographs so powerfully. Can you talk a little bit about your emotions and your job, how those two intersect? And did you ever feel like you wanted to put your camera down and do something? What's it like, Bill?
Well, it's not easy. I mean, I think I can only speak for myself. Something comes over you, the old story of a camera is your shield. I don't think if you have a shield and you don't feel as a human compassion, it's not going to come through your work. I mean, you feel things deeply. But I think you also realize early on that your mission is to capture that heart and that need and that transcendence and pass it on to the reader. Because it becomes very clear early on that the best thing you can do is to get the information back to a people that has got a lot of money and that can do some help. They can come, they can help, they can send money, whatever the need is. So I think, obviously you have your moments down there, you kind of lose it, but we're not social workers, we're not aid workers. And obviously if something was happening, I've always equated it that if I'm walking down the street and there's something happening, if there's a piece of concrete on a kid, and there's two guys trying to lift it off, and they look at me and they say, help me, of course I'm going to put my camera down and do that. I don't have an ethical problem. If that's not acceptable, I'd still do it, because I'm a human being. But generally speaking, you're there to document what's going on and to transmit that information back as quick as possible. But yeah, it's a tough thing to say.
I mean, Bill said he can only speak for himself, but I 100% agree with what he said. I get a question a lot, like, do you ever feel like you're exploiting by photographing somebody in pain? Definitely not. It depends on your orientation, how you approach a situation, what you plan on doing with the picture, what kind of pictures you're taking. I mean, there's ways to go about documenting something horrendous in something that is in a well-rounded, like, compassionate way that has a point, and it's not just like, wow, this is gross, wow, this is awful. It's bigger than that. So, and also just the sense of mission. I think that when I first started getting into this work, my sense of purpose of being a photojournalist wasn't as actually clear, which is counterintuitive. And I felt when I first time went to Haiti was with Partners in Health, and I saw these doctors doing these outrageously wonderful things, and I was in my mind just taking pictures, and I felt hopelessly useless, especially because that was my first track. That's what I started out to do, was medicine, and I got distracted by photojournalism, which I'm very happy for now. But I felt really torn at first, and then over the years, it's actually, I don't feel that at all. I mean, I feel like, you go, doctor, you fix that person, I'm going to photograph that, and I really feel like that's what I bring, and that's what I can do. But like Bill said, you do have your moments, you do have your breakdowns, and you do have the times where you just can't bear to take another picture of somebody crying, and instead you just hold hands and, talk to people.
I just like that quickly. For example, I'd be in a situation where someone would just look at me and, you know, not early on, because early on everyone is so traumatized, but as the days went on and the trips go on, people would just look at you and, you know, and whenever I get that from someone, I would turn away. I would not take their picture, partly because you're feeling, I mean, all they have at some point, people have is their dignity. And I don't want to take that from them. Also, when someone doesn't want to have their picture taken, you're not going to take a revealing moment of them anyways. But that's how I operate. I mean, unless there was some extraordinary event that needed to be documented. But people suffering, if I don't feel I can do it in a tasteful,